Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing great and staying safe. It seems that we have to start and end up all the time by staying safe at home. Last time we talked about different types of strategies that the organizations can apply. Um, that was an introduction to what type of strategy that an organization can choose. Today, we're going to talk about a new chapter, start up a new chapter that's about the external audit. That chapter is it's very brief. It's not a big chapter, and it includes mainly. We're going to talk in this chapter about the different external forces that the organization should consider when they are analyzing the environment in advance to the formulation of the strategies. In other words, we're going to take two chapters. The chapter that's going to talk about called external audit and another chapter that's called internal audit. For the external audit, it makes an assessment for the external environment, and the internal audit, it makes an internal assessment for the environment inside the organizations. So as for the external audit, and this chapter, we're going to talk briefly about the different external forces that the organization should consider before they formulating their strategies. And then we're going to explain the five forces model of competition and how they are relevant in the formulation of the strategies. Let's start with the definition of the external audit, or what we can call environmental scanning or industry analysis. What do we mean by this? External audit means that you are trying to make an assessment for the external environment and try to identify and focus on the different external trends and events that a single firm or you as a firm cannot control. In other words, you are trying to look for the different opportunities and threats that the organization might face, and that requires from you as a managers to formulate strategies to take advantage of these opportunities or avoid or reduce the impact of the threat. What is this all about? Imagine that, for example, you are an organization working on, let's say, steel industry, or an organization that depends on different materials that you used to import from abroad. Okay? And it happens that the Egyptian pound was floated, and that affected, of course, the cost, affected your costs of imports. That's going to be considered what? An opportunity or a threat? Of course, it's considered an external threat. So you should have in advance certain strategies that will be helping you to deal with these threats. How about opportunities, for example? If you are also working in organizations and it happens, for example, that if you are, like, let's say if there are big supermarkets or big, that have different chains, and then you found that people, you used to have your customers all the time, and then you found many people are actually preferring to get their products delivered than they go and buy by themselves. So that's going to be considered an opportunity for you due to the changes in customers' preferences. So why not to have a strategy that will help you sell your products online for these customers? So you should have a strategy ready to the changes in the customer's preferences, if this is something can be considered an opportunity for you that will help you increase your market share, for example. So how would you be able to have your strategies ready? Only if you have made a good assessment in advance for your development of your strategy for the external environment. That's why it's called environmental scanning or industry analysis, because you are trying to look at the general trends that's there. What is something that can be considered an opportunity in the future or a threat? So how can I think, how can I make a strategy for my organizations that will help me take advantage of that opportunity? Like, for example, we talked about Nike, for example, and they have made products for veiled women. Maybe they knew that there is an opportunity in the market, that now many of women are started to learn swimming and so on, but they do not have uh, swimming suits suitable for them from our brand. So that considers an opportunity. So they developed a strategy for a product development strategy, develop a product that is help them take advantage of the opportunities of many girls and now veiled women or veiled girls looking to learn swimming, for example. Also, how about threats, external threats? So the same. So you have to be ready, and that being ready in your development of your strategy comes from your good analysis for the environment. So here, the purpose or why you're actually doing an external audit in order to develop a finite list of opportunity that the firm could benefit from, as well as a list of the threats that the firm should avoid or should be avoided. So you are trying to identify here key variables that will help you plan for certain responses. So, of course, some would say, I cannot make a list of all opportunities available in the market, or I cannot make a complete list of all the threats that I should avoid. Of course, that's true. No one can make a complete list because we are not in a utopian world, but at least the main opportunities that you can see that you should benefit from, or the main threats that you should avoid. So you can make a list of 20, for example, 20 opportunities and 20 threats. Of course, there might be 50 threats or 100 opportunity, but you are trying to choose the most important opportunity for you, available for your organizations that you can benefit from, and the most important threats that you should try to avoid. And your aim here, when you are putting in mind here, when you are doing or when you are conducting your external audit, that you are planning, you are doing this in order to help you in your formulation of your strategy to take the advantage of the external opportunity and to minimize the impact of the external or potential threat that might happen. What are the key external forces that should be included in your external audit? We can divide them into 5 broad categories. The first one is called economic forces. The second is social, cultural, demographic, and natural environment forces. Third is political, governmental, and legal forces. And fourth is technological, and finally is the competitive forces. Okay, let's start. Before we start with the economic forces, let me just refer to something very important, is that when you are working on identifying the key external factors and making a priority which comes first, you have to make sure that these factors are specific, meaning, and we refer back here, the more you quantify things to the extent possible, the better. Actionable, meaning it's meaningful in terms of how they can impact your strategy. how you refer to the external factor in a way that help you take action. Third, stated as external trends, events, or facts rather than as strategies the firm could pursue. What does it mean, that third point? Let's see this example to make it clear for you. If I'm saying that my external opportunity is to expand into Europe versus my external opportunity is that the value of the euro has increased 5% versus the dollar in the last 12 months. The second statement here is the fact, and it is in quantity, and it can indicate for me the action that I should be taking, which is to expand to Europe. Expanding to Europe here is the strategy that I could pursue. Can you think of what strategy is that? Okay, I will leave it for you. What type of a strategy? When you are talking about geographical expansion, okay? So here, the value of the euro has increased 5% versus the dollar. So it means that it could be an opportunity for me to expand to Europe. So when I'm stating it as an external audit, as an external factor, or as an external opportunity, I cannot write it as my opportunity is to expand Europe. In that way, that's gonna be the strategy. But I'm gonna state it in the form that the value of the euro has increased 5% versus dollar in the last 12 months. That's the trend. That's the external factor, okay? That will give me an indication or action of what I should be doing, which is expanding to Europe, okay? So that's for these factors. When you're talking about the factors, they should be specific, actionable, stated as external trends, events, or facts, rather than what? Rather than the strategies that the firm could pursue. Okay? Here, when we are look at this figure, when we are talking about the external forces of the organizations, here's your organizations. And here are the external factors that we have talked about: economic forces, social, political, technological, comparative, and so on. They impact, all of these factors are having an impact on the competitors, the suppliers, the distributors, the creditors, the customers, the employees, the communities, the managers, labor unions, the stockholders, government, trade association, product, service, market, natural environment, and all this in turn have an impact on the organization's opportunities and threats. So that's why when you identify and evaluate these external opportunities and threats, it will help your organizations have a better and a clearer mission and vision, will be able to develop a better strategy that can take advantage of or make use of the opportunities and try to avoid threats, help them achieve their long-term objectives and develop policies that will help them achieve their annual objectives. Okay, let's now start. When you are, again, before starting with the first force, when you are conducting your external audit, you need to gather what we call competitive intelligence information. I'm not going to define it here because we're going to define it later at a different point when we are speaking about the competitive force. When we are speaking mainly about the competitive forces. So here, let's refer it here to the fact that you gather information about the economy, about the social structure, about the culture, about the demography, about the environment, about the political situations, about the government situation, about regulations and legal issues, about the technological trends. And again and again and again, as many managers are involved and as many employees as involved in the process, that's going to give you the better results. And why again is that? Because when you are involving people, you gather more information, you gather more ideas. You might find some of your employees referring to a certain ethnic issue or certain cultural issues that might be considered a big opportunity for you to make use of and will help you increase your market share. And if you didn't listen to that employee, you may not have considered that opportunity. So when you're involving as many managers, as many employees as possible in the process of conducting or performing the external audit, the better results you might have. When you gather the informations, you collect them and then you start to evaluate them. You might have 100 opportunities and threats. Are you going to use them all in developing your strategy? Of course not. You gathered as much as information as possible, and then you try to make a final list of the most important key external factors that you should work on, that you should consider when you are developing your strategy. So you gather the information, you evaluate it on the external opportunities and threats, and then you make a final list of the most important key external factors. You might arrange them, for example, from 1 to 20. 1 refers to the most important opportunity, and the 20 refers to the least important opportunity. The same for the threats. 1 refers to the most important threat, and 20 refers to the least important threats that you might face. And remember here that these factors might change over time, might change by industry. So maybe at a point of time when the price of a certain price of oil, for example, it might affect your products, it might affect you. Maybe the prices of oil increases now or decreases now, so that changes over time. So that factors, you have to consider this when you are analyzing your external factors. The external audit is based on an approach that's called industrial organization approach to competitive advantage. The industrial organization approach to competitive advantage actually believes that the external factors are more important than internal factors in gaining or sustaining the competitive advantage. Again, the industrial organization approach to competitive advantage believes that the external factors are more important than the internal factors for the firms to gain and sustain competitive advantage. They believe that if we focused on the external opportunities and threats, and we analyze them well and build our strategies based on that, it's actually more important for us than going and deeping inside and looking for the internal factors about the firms. If we focused on the external factors, that will help us gain and sustain a competitive advantage. Do you remember the sustained competitive advantage that we have talked about in chapter 1? So they believe in this. On the other hand, when we in the coming lectures, when we start talk about the internal audit, you will find that there is another theory or another approach that's called resource-based approach that advocates the opposite. For the resource-based approach, they believe that the internal factors are more important than the external factors to gain and sustain the competitive advantage. What do you think? Do you think the internal is more important than the external, or the external is more important than the internal? What do you think? Okay. In fact, both of them are important. You cannot ignore the external factors, And you cannot ignore the internal factors in developing your strategy. You actually need both. So both of them are actually very important for the success of the organization and for the success of a developing of a strategy that will help the organization gain and sustain a competitive advantage. Let's start with the first external force that we're going to talk about in this lecture, which is the economic forces. In any organizations, there are different economic forces that can affect them. Let's have an example about some of these forces. Interest rate, for example. If the interest rate increases or decreases, of course, it will affect your organization. The inflation rate, for example, the unemployment trend, the level of unemployment in the country, the value of the dollar, the factors about imports and exports, okay? Income differences by region, for example, if I'm planning to expand and apply a market development strategy, expanding to a new geographical areas. So I need to look at the income of these people living in these areas or in that country. And is it different than if I open my factory in South Africa compared to Tanzania, for example? Which one of them requires higher income? That means higher cost for my organization. How about the economic conditions of the foreign country? How about the stock market, the tax rate in my country, the tax rates in other countries? So all these are considered economic factors that I need to consider when I'm developing my strategy, when I'm looking at it. Okay. Do I, just back to this point, do I analyze all these factors and forces? Do you think so? No, of course not. But I will choose from them the most important economic forces that I believe that it might directly impact my work, might directly impact my business. So I have to develop a strategy that will help me deal with that. Okay, so if I'm involved, let's take an example. If I'm planning to open my new business in a certain country and I work on goods that are considered for luxurious goods for people who already spend money in let's say very high expensive perfumes, for example. So I have to look here, do people like to spend in these issues? Their economic, there's their income of people is high in this country, so they will be able to spend on such thing. Or if I'm, for example, want to open my factory in a certain country and I will be importing different materials needed for running my factory. So what are the import-export factors in that country? So I will be categorizing the different economic forces, have a look at them differently and see and rate them from the most important to the least important or to the least one that could have an impact on my own work and business. The second force or category of forces that I might need to look at when I'm conducting my external audit is called social, culture, demographic, and natural environment forces. There are new trends that create different types of consumer and different needs for different products, new services, and of course that requires different strategies. Let's take one of the demographic factors, for example. If I'm having my population, aging population, so the most percentage of people is from aging people. So I might consider working on services or working on products that are delivered for aged people, or for let's take an example. If I'm producing cranes, for example. So I will be talking about aging cranes, and maybe more than cranes for babies, or maybe more than cranes for adults or something. So I will be categorizing, I will building my strategy based on that. On the other hand, if my population, most of my population is youth, for example, so I will be considering products that's directed to youth. So that will affect my developing of my strategy. If I, for example, looking at, this is one of the demographic factors. If I'm talking about um, natural environment factors, for example, um, climate change, factors related to the nature, viruses, now that we are having coronavirus, what strategies, if you just think of this, I believe that after coronavirus, many organizations, because that's really a big external threat to all industries, it's completely unexpected, that it affected everyone. So I believe after the end of this crisis, hopefully ya Rabbi soon, that many organizations will be considering that kind of threats and will try, good organization of course, and will try to develop backup plan that will help them work in, like work from home in case something happens, like what we are doing with you now. Here there was a crisis, okay, so we had a backup plan that professors could use the e-learning, could record audio and contact with you through emails, send you the assignment through emails and or through the model and so on. So you're ready somehow to deal with the issues, compared to, for example, to another school who did not know how to use e-learning tools, didn't know how to record, students themselves were not accepting, and so on. So in that case, that's kind of a strategy, right? Or for organizations who allow their employees to work from home. So they have to have the technological capacities needed to run work from home, and also to be able to follow with the employees. So that's kind of things, that's kind of forces that you need to analyze in advance and be ready to adapt to any changes that might happen. Let's have a look at the different or the key social, cultural, demographic, and natural environmental variables. If we are talking about, for example, the number of marriages or a number of divorces, that might affect your business and might affect the services that you deliver, um, immigration levels, or life expectancy rates. These are all examples of the social factor that might affect you, that you might need to consider. Attitudes toward the quality. If you are, this is a social factor, or can be considered also a cultural factors. If some people actually do not care about the quality that much, or compared to other countries who do really care much about the quality, or people care more about the customer service, or if you're talking about the attitude towards foreign people, how about the people in other countries? Do they friendly treat foreigners, or they have a bad relationship with foreigners, so that if I open my industry there, I will be facing many difficulties with working with those people in that country? How about pollution control? What percentage? So all these are considered different variables that I need to consider when I'm conducting my external audit. Again, do I look at all these? Of course not. I will be choosing the most important variables that I believe that will be affecting my own business. Third category is the political, governmental, and legal force and legal forces. Now, as we know, We are in a globalized world. Governments, markets, economies, organizations all interact together. And whatever happens, maybe it could be a political variable in a certain country, in the United States, for example, or in China, might affect your business and might affect your competitive advantage and might have an impact on your formulations of your strategy. How is that? If you are talking about, for example, the laws, let's take the legal factor. If you remember when we spoke about Uber in Korea, when Uber first started working in Egypt, they faced at the very beginning some legal problems, legal issues, right? Because there was no kind of such regulations that organize such a type of business, right? But then they worked on with the government to solve that issues and make a regulation that will facilitate their jobs. So that was a kind of a factor that they needed to consider and to develop a strategy to handle to work with. Okay, if you're speaking about um, if you're speaking about the relationship with other countries, if your country X have a bad relationship with country Y, and you are a businessman from country X and you plan to open a new business in country Y, you might expect some complications and some complexities in working in country Y, given that you are a national of country X. So that's a factor that you still need to consider when you are uh, working on building your business. The political conditions of a foreign country. If you are planning to start your business in a country that's not stable, that's having a civil war, that's having unstable government or many changes in the government. So that's considered a condition that you need to consider when you are developing your strategy, when you are analyzing your strategy. Okay? The force, okay, is technological forces. That's also very important, a key thing when you are analyzing your external environment. New technologies, the internet of things, biotechnology, robotics, artificial intelligence. Now, innovations and innovations and innovations. And this is very special and highly important factor and force that you need to analyze if you are working in a high-tech industry. So you need to identify and evaluate carefully the main technological opportunities and threats and to be able to be ready to develop a strategy to make use of that opportunity and try to minimize the impact of the threats or avoid it. So that's very important. And you remember the example when you talked about Nokia, right? They ignored the changes in the technology or to adapt to change. That's why they had they were very highly competitive. They had a competitive advantage in the very beginning of being a smartphone, very starting, and so on. But they failed to have a sustained competitive advantage because they did not adapt to the changes in technology. More other companies have already developed new technology that they were not able to adapt. They were not able to adapt to the changes in customer preferences. That can be considered a factor here. Changes in customer preference. They were not able to adapt to such change. So here, technological forces is very important, especially in high-tech industries. And that's why many firms have here what we call chief information officer and at the same time chief technology officer. They should be working together in order to make sure that all the information needed to formulate, implement, and evaluate the strategies available and when it's needed. So they are responsible. The chief information officer is kind of a manager who tries to manage the relationship between the firms and the stakeholders, while the chief technology officer is in fact mainly focuses on the technical issues. data processing, software, hardware acquisitions. So he's mainly concerned about the technology, while the information officer works on the relationship with the stakeholders. What are the results of the technological advances? Technology actually can offer a great opportunity for you, and at the same time, a main threat that you might be considered in formulating the strategy. And remember the example of Nokia. It might also affect the organization's product, services, market, suppliers, competitors, customers, everything. So that any changes in technology might have an impact on all this. So that's why you have to be always adapted to the changes in the technology. It can create new markets, results in new and improved products. Remember, for example, if I was only a shop that was selling, a retail shop that you come and buy from me, and now I decided to make use of the technology and make an app, for example, on the mobile, so that you can make your order on your cell phone and send me, and I can deliver it for you. So I'm making use of the technology. And now in that sense, I'm creating a new market. Why is that? Because I'm attracting a customer that actually wouldn't have come to me on foot and buy. He would rather buy things online. So when he found that I can sell things online, he chooses me. So that can give me a competitive advantage compared to another shop who just do not deliver or do not have such app, and who do not, that's why cannot sell online, for example. Also, the changes in technology, of course, can lead to new improved product, like having an Apple Watch, for example, or using the technology in developing anything. Like I can see that now they have developed a GPS watch for kids, that they can track your kids wherever he is. So that's kind of a technology, that's kind of an improved product, I think, that many parents would love to have, for example. Also, the technology can create new competitive advantages that are more powerful than any other advantage that are there. Like saying, when you are developing a new technology, like for example, using robots in the production, or I remember seeing videos, some videos that I can't remember in what country, that robots were actually used to in restaurants or something. Whether it's good or bad, but it's a kind of a new technology that might create a competitive advantage compared to your customers who are not using such a robots, if it's proved to be more customer oriented, or to the customers might like it more, for example. So all these are results of the technological advances. So to sum it up here, I will leave the last force for the coming lecture. But to sum it up, what we have covered so far, we spoke about the external audit, okay, as making an external assessment for your organization, for the environment that's where you work, and try to identify the different opportunities and threats that will help you in the formulation of your strategy. So here, you conduct the external audit in advance or before you can choose or you formulate the strategy, with the aim of taking the advantage of the opportunities and help you reduce the impact or avoid the threat. And then we talked about when you are writing these factors, you remember that they have to be specific, actionable, stated as facts or events or external trends. And then we talked about the different and that the external audit is based on the industrial organization approach. Please remember this. It's based on the industrial organization approach, the belief that the external forces are more important than the internal forces for the organizations to gain and maintain a competitive or sustain a competitive advantage. And then we started to talk about the different external forces that the organization should look at. Economic forces, with the different examples of the economic forces. Of course, you don't have to memorize them all, you just remember some of them. Then the social, cultural, demographic, and natural environmental forces. You will find also lots of examples here and also in your book. The political, governmental, and legal forces, the different factors, different regulation that might affect you, the political system, the stability of the environment, the political stability, the type of the government, the employment laws that are there, all these factors that can affect your organizations. And then we end up by the force factors, or the forces that might affect your organization that you have to analyze, which is the technological forces that you need to consider when you are in advance for developing your strategy. Thank you so much, and meeting you in the next lecture. Stay safe, stay home. Bye-bye.